Hey everyone, welcome to this week's episode of Terry On. I'm your host, Mandy Ramos, and back by popular demand, we've got Giovanni Ramos here again. I mean, the people spoke up, and it was actually a little rude, I thought, when they were like, you know, Gio really added something to your podcast. And I was like, can we be clear on whose podcast this is?
Oh, babe, it's yours.
Thank
it's
you.
All you. It's all you.
Thank you. So anyway, I heard the people and I said, are you available tonight to just like hop on here real quick? Just kidding.
Real quick?
Just real quick.
Actually, real quick?
Yeah,
or?
no, for like 45 minutes. Buckle
okay.
up.
All right, here we go.
Buckle up. So, we have a great episode ahead. We want to talk about, what happened anyway? What happened that led, you guys, this is going to be very uplifting and really great. Just bear with me. What happened that y'all ended up divorced? Well, not me and you. We're not divorced. Oh my gosh, do I have to start this over?
No, leave this here.
Okay.
This is going to be great.
Oh no. Okay, we aren't. But what led to our separate divorces?
We're doing fine, everybody.
Yeah, everything's great.
We're all right.
85% of the time. So moving on, we want to talk about, because I think we both have gotten a lot of questions. And while some people will be like, yo, it's none of anybody's business what happened. Well, I disagree. Yeah, thank you. I love to get involved in business. It's none of mine. The Bible disagrees with that. It does say stop meddling in other people's business. And I say it might not be meddling. What if it's just helping?
You're really good at rebranding.
Thank you. And so I think our stories are meant to shine light for other people who might be on the path behind us in the dark. So I'm not sharing this because I owe it to anybody. And I will say there's something about not sharing your story too soon. When it's too raw, it's just too much to talk about. But I'm a decade out. And it's different for me to talk about it than it was probably when I was just a year out, So that's what we're talking about on this episode. What happened anyway? And we just want to kind of share about what, from our perspective, there's two sides to every story.
That's right.
There's two of us here, so now there's four sides to this episode.
It's good math.
And we are committed to sharing it from a perspective that throws no one under the bus unnecessarily.
That's right.
If it's necessary, we'll do it. But just kidding.
No.
Not throwing anyone under the bus unnecessarily.
There has never, nor will there ever be, a good time to throw anyone under any buses. Just a disclaimer for Terry On podcast.
I don't know. I can think of a couple scenarios.
Yeah, well.
If you're coming on the street and there's a dinosaur or a bus, where are you throwing the person? Protect him under the bus. That's what I say.
I mean, honestly, I kind of want to see where it goes with the dinosaur. What the heck is a dinosaur doing in the same era as a bus?
We should cut this out. Anyway, we're committed to telling it from our perspective, recognizing there's a whole nother perspective. So we're very aware of that. And in no way need have an agenda that promotes our innocence in the divorce. Because do we believe that in a divorce there's like one innocent party and one guilty party?
Nah.
We do not believe that.
Not only is that unbiblical, but it's just not realistic.
Yeah. So anyway, that's what's ahead. But first, I want to start out with our new segment, Seashell Stories.
That's right.
Yeah, so I got a good one. You want to hear it?
What you got?
Okay, so this one goes back to like 2019 maybe, and a friend of mine had a baby, and I offered to make a meal, and as I'm making it, and I felt really like, I don't know, it felt really important for me to do this, even though my day like had gone off the rails. And it would have been, and I knew if I reached out to my friend and was just like, hey, I'm just like going to order you pizza and call it a day, she would have been like totally understandable, right? She would not have thought twice about that. But for whatever reason, I felt like this compelling feeling to like make this meal for them as an act of care, of love, of compassion, an act of sacrifice, honestly.
That's dope. That's very kind.
Well, I don't know. I'm not saying it was like, I just felt compelled.
Sure.
Probably by the Lord. And so I did it. And while my kitchen is like in disarray and I'm trying to gather the children to like get out the door and take this meal at an appropriate time, at this point it's like probably past 6:00 and they're very hungry, I'm sure. And I'm very hungry, but I didn't have a really good plan for when I got home, and I didn't make enough to like have extra when we got home, and I was not gonna go in their house and like squat and have dinner with them. Like they just had a baby. So I'm like, got it, dropping it off and leaving.
Right.
So on the way home though, I kept thinking like, man, what am I gonna make for dinner? And these stories happen a lot to me, but I think we can forget. And I wonder if they happen to everybody else too. But I pull in my driveway, having been thinking about dinner this whole time, and I look up and Grandma is standing at the door with like a pan full of dinner for us.
Wow.
I think it was like a baked ziti situation. And right?
Yeah.
That's how we feel about baked
banging.
ziti. I know. It is banging. And so I was like, yo, what? This is amazing. So that was like already just like this amazing gift.
Yeah.
I look in my rear view mirror like as I'm getting out of my van, and I see my coworker pull in, and I'm like, why is she here? She didn't even live near here. She rolls out of her van with a pizza and salad that she picked up and said, I just felt like I should bring you dinner tonight.
That's crazy.
And this all happened at the same time. I could not make this up. I mean, I could have made it up. I'm not making it up. And so I look at that and I'm like, yo, I went from making this meal for somebody else.
Yep.
And like offering something that felt sacrificial and not like I wasn't sure if there would be anything for us to eat to coming home to double dinner.
Right.
Like double the amount of anything I even needed.
Wow.
And if we're going to talk about like life and the Lord, you know, speaking to us in all the small ways and finding gratitude and finding God and stuff, like, come on. Come
That's
on.
crazy. That's bananas.
You don't just have a coincidence like that.
Like your coworker of all people.
Who literally lives like not even near me.
Right.
And it's not like
it wasn't like a family member or like a close friend.
I did not announce to anyone that day that
Right.
like, hey, I'm going to do this very sacrificial thing. And like, could you guys pitch in? And
That's a low key miracle.
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And just this testament to like the idea that when you give, like it is truly better to give than receive. But when you give and sow generosity, what? You're going to reap a harvest of abundance, like of more than enough.
And isn't it just like God to like have grandma sitting there with a baked ziti, right? And it's like one of those things that's like, well, yeah, she's my neighbor. Obviously, she might have thought of us. Okay, cool. Like, thank you, Lord. This is a blessing, right? And then your coworker rose up. And I'm like curious, when you see your coworker pull up with food, what was that moment like for you when you realized, wow, the thing I was worried about, God heard me?
Yo, I don't remember. I probably blacked out, but I just remember being so confused. Like, wait, did we talk about you coming? Like, did I forget? Like, because it was just like, what is happening right now? And the reality is, Grandma gave us a lot of things, like a lot of baked goods, like cookies, all that kind of stuff.
Right.
It wasn't typical for Grandma to give us dinner, like mainly because we ate very different things. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Grandma was like Lancaster County through and through.
That's right.
She was whipping out like handballs and green beans and all those kinds
All
of
like
things.
from scratch.
Yeah, well, obs. But I was on the other side making like tostadas and like enchiladas. And we just lived different lives food-wise.
That's right.
So, but she would bring cookies all the time. So it wasn't even normal for her to just like have a pan of pasta for us. So the whole thing was just wild. And I'll never forget it. I'll never forget that moment where I kind of stood with my mouth just like hanging open, like with my hands literally full. And I walked in, and maybe because my kitchen was small or maybe because it was super messy, but I literally couldn't even fit all the food anywhere on the counters to like store it.
Wow.
And I just felt like this overwhelming sense that like God sees you.
Yeah.
He sees you. God sees generosity. He sees sacrifice. And it matters that we have a community of people around us and that we're also part of that community. Like, are we also showing up with the pizza and the salad to be a blessing to other people, you know?
Yeah.
And anyway, it's really cool to see what happens when you commit to generosity, even though sometimes it'd be easier to bail. It would.
Yeah.
Sometimes it'd be easier to just bail.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's my seashell moment.
You know what's dope about this seashell moment?
Tell me.
You know, as you're saying it, I think about Jesus and the sparrows and how, again, it's like a two-layered blessing. It's like a two-layered story. On the first layer, you got grandma bringing you baked ziti, and this is like God taking care of the sparrows. And it's like there's common grace for everyone. God sees all of us and cares for all of us. He cares for the bird. How much more will he care for you, right? And then your coworker pulls up, and it's like that added layer of, I see not only you, but I see the seed you planted of generosity and care for a friend. And I'm God, and I want to remind you, I got you back.
Yeah.
I'm watching and caring for you in the same way you went above and beyond to care for your friend.
Yeah.
Not just like a sparrow, but more specifically, because you sowed a seed to care. I care about you. So I think that that's a powerful seashell story
Oh my gosh.
on like
Yeah.
many levels.
Totally. Totally, because there's one thing, like you said, about the provision, but another thing about the promise beyond the provision of like, you're taken care of.
That's dope, babe.
And I guess I needed both of those that day, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, I hope that encourages someone in some way. I'm just going to leave it at that. I don't need to unpack the encouragement piece of this. You just be encouraged. There we go.
It
The
encouraged
end.
me, so.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, on that very high note, let's talk about divorce.
Let's do it.
Let's talk about everything crumbling. So I think a lot of people have asked me, I don't know if a lot of people ask you, maybe not. I feel like your friends might have more chill. Maybe. But like, what happened? Like, y'all looked so perfect or happy. So I'll start, and then we'll kind of like just share kind of the beginning of the end, or however we want to talk about it. But
Sure.
I just want to set up the background of like who we were to people.
Sure.
And you can do the same. So me and my first husband were not only on church staff, but also premarital mentors for couples. So helping other people build a strong relationship. We became missionaries. He was a worship pastor. So like there was this level of like, we were involved in ministry and we're trying to help other people.
Yeah.
And so I think we held like a leadership role. We held a role where maybe people look to us for like as an example. And so when a couple like that divorces, it can be really concerning to people, right? Like, like literally what happened. I think I had the same question, like literally what happened. Right. And I don't even know my full story, right? Because sometimes you go through a divorce and you're not given the whole story, or you don't have all the information, or you have stories that don't line up. And so there is for some people, for some of us, and I myself included in this, there is just a coming to terms, like an acceptance with like, this is literally where I'm at. This is the state of my marriage. This is what the other person is asking for. This is how much the other person is willing to reconcile or unwilling to reconcile. Right. And there is this level of acceptance that like, you can't force someone to stay, and you can't force someone to reconcile, and you can't force someone to give you the honest truth or like the real reason of what's going on. And the reality is maybe they don't always even know what the real reason is. Facts. Because I think what we'll get to later in this episode is, people don't get divorces over one catastrophic event. Typically, a lot of times it's a lot of small things build up over time that by the time the thing crumbles, I don't know that you could go back to, I think it'd be hard to go back to like kind of where it all began. Right. I don't know. Again, I'm not on neither one of us is on the side of wanting a divorce. So we're both on the receiving end of spouses that wanted a divorce. That doesn't not make us the innocent party. There's definitely stuff we contributed that was dysfunctional, both of us. Right. But we're not on the side of it of wanting to leave. So I don't have that perspective. I'm just on the side of when somebody looks at you and says, I don't want to fix this. What do you do? Right. And I think everybody responds differently to that. But the way I responded to it was, I know what my intention is. And I think at first I tried to, you do all the stages of grief, and that includes anger, sadness. It includes what's called bargaining. And bargaining in this instance sounds and looks like, okay, but maybe if I just do this, maybe if I just make his favorite meal, he'll finally be happy and then we'll fix our marriage. Maybe if I just
Right.
give him more space, he can clear his head and then he'll realize that what we have is great. Maybe if I could just,
Yeah.
fill in the blank.
Right.
Maybe if I would just stop getting so annoyed, or maybe if I would just pray more, like maybe I could fix all this.
Right.
And so I think there's an element of bargaining that happened for me for a while. And when I realized, it takes two people to reconcile. It takes two people who would like to make amends.
Yeah.
But it also takes two people being willing to come to the table and respect the requests of each other. So if there's stuff in the relationship that needs fixed and needs better boundaries on it and ways that we each need to feel safe, it takes two people coming to the table and agreeing to those things for it to even begin to work. And when somebody is adamant that they don't want to do that, you cannot make them do that.
Right.
And so after a while, after I made my intentions clear and my desires clear, it was clear that it was heading to a divorce. And even signing the divorce papers, I knew, I had a level of peace about it. That
Yeah.
I knew that me signing that paper,
Yeah.
I mean, it's going to probably sound weird, but it was like the last way I was going to honor the request of my spouse.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. That makes perfect sense.
Like, okay, I'm going to honor what you're asking for. I'm not going to control it. I'm not going to force you. I'm not going to withhold this from you because you can. You can withhold signing it.
Yeah.
But I knew that if we were meant to be together and there was any hope of, reconciliation, me signing a divorce paper wasn't more powerful than that.
That's true.
I knew that.
That's true.
Deep in my core. So
Yeah.
I signed it and felt like a very much peace about that.
Yeah.
But that was like a year after doing all the things I just said.
Yeah.
Do you want to share kind of who you were before the divorce, like who you were as a couple to people?
Yeah. Yeah. So before my first wife and I were married, I was this rapper, minister of the gospel, Christian rapper, recording music, performing, outreaches, concerts, all this, touring. And that's actually kind of the context in which we met.
Okay.
And that's how a lot of people knew who I was separately. When I was single, before we got married, they knew me as the minister, the rapper, whatever label I got put on for doing the work that I did. We met at a concert, then later at a Bible study, and that kind of became the umbrella under which our relationship was defined to people. This rapper and then like his wife. And that was later a frustration and a hindrance in our marriage, which, we'll unpack in a little bit. One of the things that happens when one of you is on a platform and the other is not, a lot of times, whatever seems shiny and glorious is all people will see. So people saw me on stage, people heard my music, I was still coming out with albums. So that was the one layer of nobody really suspecting that there was anything wrong because my ministry continued. So that's the first layer. That's how people knew us, is Gio the rapper and his wife. The other layer to us was like, on a personal level and in the church, we too were like counseling young couples here and there. There were young college student couples, soon to be married couples, that we were spending some time with and helping. And that's who kind of we became known as in the church. So we kind of had this platform and label to us in the church as being a couple that could be a go-to. And people would say, you guys are a power couple. You guys are so helpful. And in a lot of ways we were giving good advice to people. We were modeling some decent things to them early on in our beginning. And then came children. And then for me, you talked about speaking about our perspective. For me, I went on a journey that I was not expecting, nor was I ready for, nor was I confessing to anybody. I wasn't talking to many people about this journey that I went on as a dad, where I had my firstborn son, and where I thought I had walked through the journey of forgiveness with my father, I started realizing I still had some resentment and bitterness in my, towards my father. And that started impacting our closeness, my first wife and I's closeness. It started impacting our communication. It started impacting how I coped with a lot of that. And then we kept having children, and I kept making music, and so everything seemed fine. But deep down inside, I was kind of becoming entangled, or noticing the entanglement that I had with these unresolved issues that were tucked in deep down inside with my daddy issues.
Well, can we pause? Not everybody on here, and I think zero people on here besides me know about your dad. So it's not just like, oh, my dad and I got in some arguments and I had resentment. Like, just in like 10 seconds, like what, like, okay, or 20. You can have 20 seconds. Can you kind of just give a little bit on your relationship with your dad?
So for the first 5 years of my life in Puerto Rico, my mother and I experienced a very violent version of my father. And my mother suffered a lot in his presence and in that relationship, both emotionally, mentally, and physically. And after I was about 5 or 6 years old, my parents separated. My mother and I came to the United States. And ever since then, it's been an estranged relationship between him and I. Okay. We've talked maybe from that time until today, maybe a dozen times of like meaningful conversations like father and son normally. I have visited him through my childhood, but even when I went over there, I have a few memories of us having a dope relationship, but we've been very distant. I hardly know my father. He has not met any of my children. I have not seen him in over a decade, probably more. And even before then, I only saw him a handful of times.
So when you started having kids, well, specifically the first one, it kind of unlocked something that you didn't see coming, is what I heard you say.
Yeah, it unlocked this. One, I realized I was not ready for this, like on a deeper level. While probably my heart was ready, on the surface level, deep down inside, I had some wounds that were still bleeding. And fast forward through therapy and a whole bunch of actually confessing all of this, I realized I had been bleeding on people for years.
Do you think your first wife included?
My first wife included.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting because I would say too, when we had our first kid, I think I became a different version of myself that I was not prepared for. Yeah. I didn't know I had an anger problem until I had my first baby, and I didn't know how anxious I was until I had my first baby.
Yeah.
And I think when you're married to someone and you become a different version of yourself, that's not necessarily the most flattering, or the easiest to deal with, especially if it's a character trait that like makes that other person kind of like it's a, it's a sensitive thing for that person. I think it can be really hard to walk through the person you become after you have children. Because I think back before I had kids, and I don't remember like having a short fuse or freaking out. Maybe I did, but I don't remember that. I remember and I don't remember being like so anxious that I would have like, I think, panic attacks. Like I don't remember having anything like that until I had children.
Wow.
So I feel like even with you saying that, like, I think parts of you that came to life also include like a codependency and an entanglement. And when that happens, and I think that happened a little bit with my firstborn too, when you're like overly enmeshed with your child, that does communicate something to your spouse. And it does take energy away from your spouse that goes into a kid. And not that we shouldn't give our kids energy, but codependency and enmeshment is like more energy than necessary, or or more energy than that's helpful,
Yeah. Yeah. And it was that journey, going through that journey, that I started noticing, didn't know what to do with it for a while, but I started noticing something's off here. I should be either more like, I should be happier, I should be more present, I should be more engaged in this way, and something's off. And I would have some conversations about it. But see, here's the thing. There were a few things lingering that had been present in my life for a very long time that I wasn't ready to talk about. And so I wouldn't bring this up because I didn't want to risk it going to a deeper conversation where I would have to unpack some of that stuff. Two of those things being my addiction to pornography, which I needed to talk about a lot sooner than I did.
Did you think it was an addiction, or did you think it was normal?
I did not know it was an addiction. I only knew it was a coping mechanism. I knew it was comforting. I knew it was an escape. It was a lot of things, but I did not know it was an addiction. And I didn't know it was hurting me the way that it was. I didn't know it was bleeding out into other areas of life.
Well, because in order to have an addiction, there's a lot of other things that go along with that. A lot of times you've got to involve like lying, covering up, deceit, all of that. You've got to disconnect from people, and I think part of the addiction to pornography that's present in a lot of relationships is the effect it has on your spouse.
Yeah.
And I think if you're not close enough and connected enough that you can have honest conversations about it, what fighting chance do you have?
Right, because what ended up happening through the years, even looking back to my first encounter with pornography at like the age of 8 or 9.
Which was what? Someone introduced you to it?
Yeah. Even thinking back then, through my teens, through my 20s, through ministry, through friendships, through relationships, through all of it, not only was there a shame attached to it, but there was also a denial attached to it, especially in my culture, especially in the culture where I grew up, and several of the cultures that I identify with, right? Not just hip hop culture that, sexualizes everything and objectifies women, but also just machismo Latino man culture that's like, boys will be boys, that's what boys do. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like there's this celebration of perverting sex and pornographing. Is that a word? It's not. Sex itself, that for me, it was almost like it was a non-issue, even though I had some shame to it. And I was carrying that and didn't know what to do with that. And so carrying this addiction to pornography through all my years, I knew I had to hide it. But I also knew it, like I felt this sense of, but it's okay. Because hip hop told me it was okay. Latino machismo told me it was okay. Like this was okay. But I also knew I had to hide it. And so I go into having my firstborn son. And the other piece to it is when I became a serious Christian at the age of like 18, graduating high school, and I became surrendered and really faithful to Jesus, I was able to rely on the Spirit to give me distance from this addiction for some periods of time. So sometimes there would be years where I wouldn't go to pornography. Sometimes there would be months. There was a span for a very long time of like almost 8 years, 7 years where I didn't touch it. And then I did for like a few weeks, and then I didn't for a couple years, and then a couple months, and then I didn't for a couple years, and then I was going on and off. And so because of that, I also didn't have this siren going off in my head. Confess it, talk to somebody, get help. I just kept thinking, I'll stop when I want to, but I couldn't and I didn't.
Well, as anyone with any addiction knows who's at a place where they're in recovery, you don't have the power to just stop it. That's the whole thing about an addiction.
Right, because the problem wasn't pornography, although pornography is a problem. The problem was the deeper thing that only Jesus could heal, and he was reaching out to heal. That's what the real problem was. The addiction to pornography was just a fruit of the real gap, the real problem.
So there are a lot of people in relationships, in marriages, where there's pornography involved.
Yeah.
And there are some people, I think, that don't think it's a problem. So even, I will just say this, the research has been done and the results are in that whether you're a Christian or not, the findings are porn damages you. It damages your brain. It damages your relationship. So whether morally, spiritually, whatever you think about porn, outside of it being right or wrong, it's wrong because it damages lots of people.
Yeah.
And makes it really difficult to have meaningful relationships because it's a fantasy world that sets you up for like a false expectation of what your life's going to be like or what your relationship's going to be like. And not even just that, any addiction takes away your time from the people right in front of you. Like you think about your addiction more than you think about the people right in front of you. And to bring this kind of full circle for what we started with, so what happened anyway? And talking about it's not usually one catastrophic event that kind of makes a marriage deteriorate. Right. It is a bunch of little things. One of those things is a lack of connection. I'd say that might be one of the biggest things. I don't know. I'm not a therapist. If there are therapists listening to this, they're probably just like, hey, everybody, I have a real podcast. Come tune into that. But listen, if you want just like the real people talk of my thoughts just sitting in my chair, then tune into this one.
That's right.
But just from my own personal experience, it's like this buildup over time, right? And a lot of people I've talked to, it's this buildup over time, and it starts with like this lack of connection. Well, why do you start disconnecting from someone?
Right.
Well, you start disconnecting from someone when I think one reason is when you feel like your voice isn't being heard. So I know for my marriage, I was married to someone who didn't speak up as much as I did. Now that can't be shocking news because if you had two people that spoke up as much as I did, I don't know how any surviving would happen. So two of us can't exist in the same space. So obviously, typically there's like opposites attract, right? So people end up with people that kind of balance them out in a certain way, but you can't balance out a bulldozer. And I would say in my 20s, the very like unrefined version of Mandy was that like my opinions and my thoughts became a bulldozer, and I looked for relationships where people didn't really have strong opinions because it was really easy to be friends with them. It was easy to connect with them because they gave no pushback. And to me, pushback was like a form of not love. Like it was the opposite of love. Like if you gave me any pushback, it was like, why don't you love me? Wow. That's the very immature way I thought. Right. And so I specifically looked for people that I didn't know I was doing this, but I can say this now. I was looking for people that were willing to go along with whatever. Yeah. Because they made my life a whole lot easier. What I learned over the years and as I got older is that nobody comes to this earth wanting to just go along with whatever somebody else says. They're doing that, you're accommodating for a reason, and it's usually coming from, a deeper place. And nobody wants to just go along with what somebody else says for their whole lives. Like that you weren't made like that. You were made with thoughts and opinions and feelings and, concerns and all of that. And it's all valid. Yeah. And so anyway, I just would say I barreled through life. And so I was married to somebody who tried to speak up a couple times. I mean, most of our marriage was him accommodating everything I wanted. Okay. I mean, really, if I want to say it that way. In not in every way, but like in most ways, especially when it came to parenting, right? Like I'm the one reading all the books, I'm the one doing all the things. And so it was a lot of me saying how it will be. I mean, I even think of like an example of like, he's from Texas, so he wanted our kids to call us like ma'am and sir. Now, while I don't love that, I'm currently getting called bro though, so I don't think that's any better. We probably should have gone with ma'am and sir. I discounted it and dismissed it like it was the stupidest thing I'd ever heard. And like I wouldn't respond that way now. Like if you were like, hey, I want our kids to address us a certain way, even if I didn't understand it or thought it was dumb or whatever. Yeah. I hope I've grown enough to hear you out and hear why it matters to you. Because reality is it mattered. It mattered to him that like there were parts of the way he was raised that he wanted to bring into this, but I believed truthfully that like the way I wanted to do it was the best way. And so get on board or get out of the ship, right?
Right.
Um, and it never occurred to me that like someone would get tired of that. It like truthfully didn't occur to me. I don't know if people listening to this are like, you've got to be kidding. How could you not know that this would be the worst setup possible? It's like, I just didn't, it didn't occur to me because it seemed very accommodating.
Yeah.
And I was like, great, this is a great setup for me. I like being in charge and you like doing what I say. So perfect. But it wasn't real. It wasn't authentic. It wasn't a real accommodating.
That's a good point.
And it was it was just the way he knew how to function in our relationship. Well, after a while, that gets very old. And then it morphed into not just stuff about ma'am and sir or whatever. It morphed into, hey, when you roll your eyes at me every time I talk, like it is super disrespectful and feels a certain way. And my response wasn't like, hey, I'm really sorry. That must really suck. I should do something different. It was just like, I was raised near Philly, like get over it.
Wow.
I wasn't even raised that close to Philly. But anyway, the point is my response truthfully was like not responsive.
Well, and did you even know that it was possible for this to be like a real issue?
No.
Like even as he was telling
like
you.
I thought it was stupid. I'm like, come on. How could rolling my eyes hurt your feelings?
Yeah.
What you said was stupid. No,
Yeah.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I mean, that is what I thought.
Right.
So, I think when I think about that kind of stuff, yes, if you're married to someone who dismisses your requests, you're going to lose connection. But truthfully, I don't know how deep the connection was to begin with. And this isn't just me going back and being like, well, we were never in love anyway, so blah. No. I'm being serious in I don't actually know how deeply connected we were to start. Because I know how you and I are. Yeah. And I know how connected we are in just a shoe. We don't live in a shoe. In a few short years.
Although that would be fun to live in a giant shoe.
I do think there's a house actually that is in the shape of a shoe. But
on Route 30, yeah, right?
On 30?
Route 30.
Babe, there's no shoe on 30.
Yeah.
No, in York.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's like this shoe
You're
house.
right. There's a shoe. Sorry. Yeah. I was thinking about the Steamboat Hotel. I'm like, that's a boat, babe. That's not a shoe. But
well, we don't live in either of those two.
Okay, right. So anyway, just in a few short years, the depth of connection I feel as far as like how safe I feel, how vulnerable I can get, the things we talk about, the sides of myself I show you, I can't say, when I reflect back, I can't say that those were present in my first marriage. So already not having a deep connection and feeling known and loved, then you add on top of that all this dismissive stuff.
Yeah.
And I can only speak for my part of it. I'm not going to, like, there probably were parts he was dismissing too, but he's not here to talk about it. And I'm not going to speak on that, but I can speak on what I did, and what I did was dismiss. And so I can understand why someone would feel discouraged, defeated, whatever.
Yeah.
I think there are many ways to deal with that in a marriage. And I think there are many ways that people deal with stuff like that in a marriage that aren't great, that lead you to end it. Like you end up divorced because of it. So I don't know if any of that resonates with you. Do you feel similarly?
Yeah. When you brought up that word, like authentic, one of the things that I realized, and I realized this later, right? This is hindsight. I think we're both talking hindsight. We didn't know it at the time. And at the time, we were really convinced, based on the information we had, that we were doing everything we could to make it a healthy marriage, to stay married, to keep growing this marriage. But now with hindsight, we look back and realize, oh, snap, wait, we were missing so much information. We were missing so many parts. And so when you talk about authenticity, I think for me, having this underlined, unhealed set of wounds is one layer. Having this secret sin and addiction of pornography is a second layer. And then add on top of that, having this sense of self-preservation that I've had to carry almost my whole life, whether it was for my own safety in the living room in Puerto Rico because my father would get violent, or when I came to the United States and I had to learn this kind of type of resiliency that some people learn. You learn how to come to a new country, learn a new language, a new way of life with the absence of your father, single mom raised who's holding down 2 jobs and killing it. My mom is a boss. If you ever get to meet my mom, shake her hand and thank her. She is amazing.
I feel like she'd rather have a hug.
Yeah.
I
Well,
think she'd
ask
be
her first.
offended.
You
I
know,
don't know. I feel like she'd be offended if you just shook her hand.
boundaries.
She'd be like, "What's this?"
She's reading boundaries, and
She
so I
loves
think,
hugs.
yeah, no, she loves hugs. Offer her a hug. Um, she's amazing. And to see the power in her journey of coming to America, raising me on her own, and then eventually with the help of my stepdad. And I mean, it's just been amazing. But my journey through all of that was a lot of self-preservation, right? So I say all that to say, like, there's all this stuff that I brought into my first marriage that when I look back, and when many people would look back, and I wonder if this is the same for you and your first husband, when many people would have labeled your marriage, they would have said, wow, you guys are so in love. Wow, you guys are a power couple. Wow, you guys are so dynamic. People would say that about us. And I even felt that. I would categorize the first like half of our marriage as very in love, very connected, right? We have a lot of like great memories, laughs, all this stuff. But then when I look back truly, I think, wait, I don't know that I was presenting my full self into the marriage because there were parts of me I did not want anyone to see. I didn't even want Jesus to see this part of me.
So how connected can you really be?
So how connected could you really be?
Yeah.
And so
and you can feel that when you're in a relationship. So whether you verbalized any of that or not, like, you know what I mean? You can
Right.
feel a disconnect from someone.
Right. So there were simple things that, you know, my first wife would ask of me that I either was unable to fulfill, to serve her with, or I didn't even know how, or maybe even wanting to, because if I provided this, if I offered this, it might lead to us tapping into the addiction. It might, if I go that deep, if I get that connected. And so there was this self-preservation that I was doing. I didn't even know I was doing it. I was very convinced that I was giving my full self. And I don't know how many people go into marriages like that. I wonder how many other marriages go into that thinking and convinced and actually truly convinced I'm offering my full self into this marriage.
Well, let me ask, did she ask for things like, you know, I was saying my first husband would be like, hey, can you stop doing that? Or, you know, whatever, asking certain requests that were definitely fair. When it came to you guys, was she asking for certain boundaries for you or certain things for you to like feel safe in the relationship when it came to like pornography, for instance?
So not for pornography, because to her knowledge, for a good chunk of our marriage, it had been a one-time thing early on and then never again. And to be honest, it was a very long time from that first time until I picked it up again. But the rest of the story is that I had picked it up again and she never knew. And because it was a thing at all, there was an inability for me to fully give and offer and be open arms with all that. One request was, you know, I had this paying gig where I was taking photos for this local gym. And some of that required I would take photos of women who were not very dressed. You know, it was a gym culture that promoted and celebrated, you know, very little clothing during the workouts. So I was snapping photos and that made her uncomfortable. And when she asked repeatedly, could you stop doing this gig? I would either justify it. Oh, it's bringing us money. It's bringing us this benefit, this perk. I would brush it off because I didn't want to risk, if I had to give that up, then I, on a personal level, have to admit I have this addiction also that I have to give up. But also I wanted the autonomy. And so, yeah, it showed up even in that.
Well, and I think the real thing is like, it's possible to take photos of people at a gym and it be a fine gig. Like, it doesn't always mean there's something sketchy going on.
Right.
But when you already feel disconnected and you already feel a level of maybe distrust or like you haven't earned that relationship capital and that depth of trust that it's like, yeah, because the reality is you and I both know this. If you're going to step out on your partner, like it's not just going to happen at a gym. Like, you know, you can avoid every gym, you can avoid you could avoid it all and you're still going to do it anyway. You're going to find a way to do it.
Right.
Like the gym's not the problem. The beach isn't the problem. The whatever isn't the problem. The problem is like there's a way deeper cause for the disconnect.
Yeah.
And I think for both of us, what we're saying is like we both we showed up not fully ourselves, not sure that someone would love us if they knew all of us. I think that's pretty common.
Yeah.
And then when our partners had a request of like something that would help them feel better in their relationship, we dismiss them.
Right.
And you may be listening to this wondering, wow, guys, how's this working out for you two? You sound like rays of sunshine. So let's talk about that for a second, right? So I had a long time that I was not married before I met you. And for me, I did go on a lot of dates and dated a couple people. And that was really crucial because I got married pretty young. And my first husband was really my only serious boyfriend. And I didn't have a lot of information after I got divorced of like, well, what is it? Because I really do think that like, I think you could be paired up with someone and you could bump into each other's wounds a lot more than if you paired up with someone else, right? Like,
wow.
Not everybody has the same sensitivity. So my personality, the ray of sunshine, isn't meant for everyone. There's not everyone out there that's just waiting in line like, hey, that sounds fun.
Yeah.
But there's someone who it's very interesting because, you know, when I met you, Gio, it was like you kept complimenting me on the very things that other people had told me were like a problem. And you loved it about me.
Wow.
And I didn't tell you any of that. It's not like you were like buttering me up or something. And I just kept thinking it was so weird. You kept naming things that were like, you love this aspect. And I was like, are you serious? Because I was pretty sure this is why I was alone. So it made me realize, wait a second. Like it basically, I mean, there are, I guess, some traits that are just not great for anybody. Like, I mean, the research also has been done and then the results are in that if you're with a negative partner, someone who's a Debbie Downer, a wet blanket, kind of like always the devil's advocate, like all of that. It's not the devil's advocate, but plays devil's advocate. But I guess whatever. It just sounds terrible. Yeah, like you are the devil's advocate.
Does not need no advocates out here.
But you get what I'm saying. Argues for the sake of arguing.
Sure.
If you're in a relationship with a negative person, it literally affects you, your mental health, your emotional health, your spirit. It does. Like, it's like the results are in. It's true. It's not great for you. So I don't think there's anybody out there that's like, you know what I want to sign up for? Wet blanket. There's nobody that's looking for that. I guess what I'm talking about is like being opinionated or being outspoken or whatever the traits are about me that you said you loved, which were the very things that other people had a problem with. I think it's important to recognize that like just because one person didn't want to be with you or many people, like maybe like it didn't, like not many people because then I guess like maybe you're the common denominator, but like if one person walks away from you because they find you intolerable, like I hate these traits about you, it could literally just be that you're triggering something in them, like wounds, you're uncovering wounds in them.
Facts.
You can work through that. It's not impossible, right?
Yeah.
But you have to be ultra honest about it. You have to communicate and you have to have this deep connection to be able to do that.
Yeah.
If you can't even have that conversation, then yeah, I'm not sure how it's ever going to work.
Right.
So I think for me and you, one, I spent a lot of years kind of like figuring out what I wanted, what I didn't want. Am I okay not being in a relationship? But would I rather stay single the rest of my life than settle, you know, for whatever I thought was out there? And there was a lot of that had to happen for me to get to the bottom of like, what actually would I say yes to at this point? Which was different. It became different than from the beginning of the time that I was single until the time I met you. That really morphed because of dating people and kind of learning like what are the things that make me the worst version of myself and what are the things that would make me the best version of myself and what is the way that God has wired me And what do I need in a partner in order for those things to thrive, right? And then and then the other side of it is, am I mature enough to be in a relationship? Can I handle someone coming to me with a request and me actually taking it seriously and not dismissing it? Have I grown? Yeah. Have I become a person who can like be respectful in a relationship? And so if the answer is no, like I'm noticing in my dating that like I'm not able to handle conflict, disagreement, whatever, then the answer is I'm not ready. Like I shouldn't put myself in those scenarios because I'm not ready to handle that. So I think for me and you, our saving grace is a couple of things, but I think one is like we're very mindful of like, I think we're both really honest about the things that broke down our first marriage.
Yeah.
I think we try to stay very open and honest in our communication. It's not always great. Sometimes it hurts each other's feelings.
Traffic circle.
Okay, yep. We don't have to talk about that again. I felt like we cleared that up, but okay. I think we're both committed to the Lord and asking, and I mean like in a way where it's inviting the Holy Spirit into our lives on a daily basis where we can pivot in moments, right? Like it's not like we're just so stuck and stubborn. And if we are, we eventually allow the Holy Spirit to like redirect us. You know, somebody asked me after I was divorced, like basically, how can you like guarantee or how can you feel reassured that like you're like, she was asking this because she was getting married. How can I like know that my marriage isn't going to end up in a divorce too? And I was like, I don't know, man, because I like read every book and I thought I was doing all the things, but the only conclusion I could come to is like, but if both people are surrendered to the Lord and truly, right, like willing to hear feedback, to walk in humility, to really die to like yourself, I can't imagine how that would end up in a divorce.
Right.
I'm just like not sure.
Yeah.
So that would be my only answer of like, well, did I do that in my first marriage? No. Do I do that great here? I think 85% of the time. Would you give me a B on that?
Give you an A, babe.
Of course you would, but like realistically.
I think that you know, when you're asking the question of do we do this great or do that great? I think the question that comes to my mind is, are we coming at these things from a surrendered place versus before we were not in a surrendered state? And I think that's the game changer, because I can tell you, you talked earlier about being with someone with that's a wet blanket. And I think sometimes you label me Mr. Positivity and optimistic, but sometimes I could be a wet blanket too. Right. And so while there are...
wait, let's talk about that. Hold on. Wait, is Gio going to talk about his flaws and dark corners? Let's hear it, everybody.
That's going to be in season 2.
All right. Fine.
No, so I think that there are moments where I can be a wet blanket, although I make it my life's mission to see the positive, and not just to see the positive to ignore the negative, which is what I did for a long time, but rather see the positive, because I really have come to a place of surrender and gratitude for where I am, where the parts of me that were bitter towards my father, and this is the game changer, right? The parts of me that were bitter towards my father, that had an underlying sense of pain that I was hiding and masking and comforting and band-aiding with pornography. Now I'm grateful I went through that, because it brought me to a place of knowing the love of God. And now I can be positive about it, and I don't have to band-aid it or cope with it in a destructive way that I have to feel shame over. I could actually be surrendered and grateful for that experience, and then come at it differently, right? So like there are parts of me that are like that, where I could be very positive, but then sometimes I could be a wet blanket, and I realize, and I'm noticing, I'm learning about myself, the times that I'm a wet blanket about things are times where I feel insecure, where I feel that I'm not, I don't have a lot of confidence in what I believe about this thing. And so sometimes when I'm not confident in what I believe about this thing, I just default to being a wet blanket. Just shut it down. Let's just like shut it down. Nothing, because I'm not confident in what I believe about it. So nobody gets to speak on it. And so those are the times that I could be a wet blanket about stuff.
Do you feel like you were that way in your first marriage?
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah,
Absolutely.
that would be a bummer. I would just,
Absolutely. I
And-
think that there were a lot of seasons.
I was trying to make a joke about you being a bummer. Now I just sound like a jerk because you kept talking.
I legit thought it was a real question. I thought it was a good question.
No, it was a good question, but I was like, that would be a bummer. But like, it was just being funny.
No, and it it was, while a lot of people would label me, like I would be the life of the party. I don't know that I actually was the life of the party more than I was just the loudest one in the room to keep people from going too deep to maybe eventually uncover those parts of me I was hiding.
Well, but you did have a point where you kind of came to your rock bottom with pornography.
Yeah. And so, my first wife pulling away in her own way from me and our marriage sort of sent me into this journey of deep sadness and digging deep into the underlying sadness. And it took me through therapy. It took me through sitting with friends who journeyed with me through that season of my life. And through those conversations, I got to these points where I started pinpointing what the cause of who I had become, who I was, not only who I was personally, but who I was in my first marriage, that led to her pulling away. Her pulling away was her decision. That was her choice. That was her free will. But what I contributed and how I influenced her pulling away, I own that. I have to take that. And I think we all have to take what we contribute to our relationships.
Right. There's a way that you, like we mentioned earlier, like there's a way to handle that in a healthy way.
Yeah.
But that takes a lot of emotional intelligence, a lot of maturity, a lot of connection, all of that. So we can understand, and I say this too, I could understand how my first husband got to the point of, I can't see this getting any better.
Yeah.
And I don't know another way other than, disconnecting and divorcing and all that. So like, to your point, her pulling away was her choice and might in her mind have been her only option.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And so for me, for this, we keep bringing it back to this one issue, though it's not the main issue. It was a big issue that was telling of all the other issues. This issue of pornography. January 19th, 2020, I'm sitting in a worship service. I hear this song, and this song breaks me and opens my eyes, opens my heart, opens my mind, opens everything. Living Hope, my Living Hope. Mm-hmm. And it was that song that inspired. And I heard the Lord. People talk about hearing the Lord. And a lot of people, and for years, I carried a jealousy when people would talk about hearing the Lord, because I'm like, how come I never heard the Lord? I read his word. I hear pastors. I hear people's voice, but I never heard the Lord. I want to hear the Lord. Well, don't you know, in my deepest sadness, is when I finally heard the Lord. And it was him speaking to me, saying, the Holy Spirit said, it's time to be free. And it was as clear as day, and I knew everything that meant. And it was time to unlock and shatter this chain that I was still tied to, that was actually tied to everything else. And the Lord had been dealing with everything else for the last 2 or 3 years at this point, little by little, healing little parts here and there. But it was that last part, and it was a huge ball and chain, and it was pornography. It's time to confess. It's time to be free. And the first person I had to confess to was the Lord. And from that confession on January 19th, 2020, and even though it had been a while before then that I had engaged in pornography, watched it or anything, a long time, that day was the day I mark as my freedom, because that was the day I confessed to the Lord for the first time ever that I had an issue with pornography. And I felt a freedom. I can't explain it. It was almost as if I was actually broken free out of this shell.
Wow.
So
That's awesome.
I give glory to God, and I'm really grateful for that moment. And I realized its impact in many ways on who I was for
because
so
it wasn't
long.
the only thing, but to your point, it was like connected to a lot of other things,
So
right?
many other things. Yeah.
That can then create a disconnect between you and your spouse.
Yeah.
So when people who you look up to, people looked up to us, to you guys, like, and from the outside looking in, and honestly, even from the inside, I would say this, and I don't know if you would say this too. I didn't know there was a huge problem. Did you know there was a huge problem?
I did not.
No, so it's not like anybody was faking it. Like, there was not me walking around faking it. I had no idea there was like a problem.
Right.
As deep as it was. So outside looking in and even inside looking in, there was just like, it was a shock to all of us, right?
Yeah.
And so I think when I look back and I'm like, there wasn't this just one moment where I realized it was over, but in hindsight, I can look and go, there were all these little moments, and there were little moments that I could have chosen sacrifice. I could have chosen love. I could have chosen the high road. I could have chosen to listen. I could have chosen to see with like deeper eyes. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Did I know that those were all available to me? Probably not. Didn't really even know how to operate like that. And sometimes it takes losing everything for your eyes to open up and realize, I've been doing stuff a whack way.
Yeah.
And so I always think back and I'm like, okay, would I have become the person I am today? Like if I would have stayed married, and was I even capable of like even understanding how to heal and grow and reconcile? And I don't even know. And I guess we can't even answer that question, but
That's a hard question to ask. And to
I
answer.
just know that I just didn't even have the tools to like operate in a healthy way. I just didn't. I didn't have the tools. And it really truly took losing everything for me to get honest with myself. And the funny, ironic gift is I moved back in with my parents. And my parents have been married like forever, and living with them again, it was very eye-opening because I'm watching them interact in their own marriage, and I'm seeing myself.
Ooh.
And I'm seeing, oh my gosh, this is what I sounded like. Oh my gosh, that's what I did. Oh my word, this is literally how I'm operating. And like, it was so eye-opening for me to like kind of get this gift to go back to my parents' house and kind of see it from an adult perspective of, okay, this is what I'm contributing, and what am I going to do about it, right? Like, this certain dynamics. And I think it was honestly a real gift to be back in with my parents for a million reasons.
Yeah.
But it helped me to go to like kind of get to the root of why I respond the way I do, or why I react the way I do, or whatever. It helped me kind of unpack all of that, and I think helped me show up different because I was able to like name it, see it, work through it, and all of that. And so I think we all are operating in our relationships the best we know how at the moment.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so even for us, when we hit bumps in the road, which we do, and we become the versions of ourselves that we don't like. I mean, really, when you're in conflict, you become a version you don't like of yourself. I think now that we're at this we're in this a second time, we understand the stakes are higher. I don't roll my eyes at your requests as much. And I don't
And I don't keep anything hidden from you. And I think that that feels like a really good place to be. A place where I can say to you, hey, like, I recognize secrecy was not working in my favor. I need you to ask me from time to time how I'm doing. I need you to just like check in. While I'm committed and completely surrendered and free, and I will give glory to God until the day I die, I am experiencing and living in true, pure, complete freedom. However, keep checking on me. You have access for your own peace of mind, but also for my own accountability and to prove the power of Christ. Keep checking. Keep coming to see the freedom, to make sure it's still there. And I'm sure that that's a good feeling for you too, to have that open door for those kind of conversations.
Yeah, it's different. It's new for me. Like, I didn't do that in my first marriage. I didn't feel like I had, while I was able to bulldoze, I didn't feel like I don't know if I knew to like expect someone to be honest with me. Like, I don't know. I don't even know if I knew I deserved that. Really. Like, I really don't. And so I think it is a different experience. It's a different feeling. It's a great feeling to feel safe in your relationship and feel secure and feel like even if there is a bump in the road, like,
Which there are. I don't always get it right, and sometimes I make a bigger mess when it could be simple and prolong certain conflicts. You know, it's not that it's perfect for anybody listening. It's not that it's perfect by any
I know.
means.
I always tell you, Mike, if you just say, okay, babe, you're right, like it would end the argument so much faster. And it's like, there's another way. You know what I mean? There's another way.
Oh, is that what it is?
Yeah, man. And I keep
All
trying
right.
to tell you, like, yo, this thing could have wrapped up 6 hours ago.
No doubt.
And if you're wondering if I'm exaggerating about the 6 hours, I'm not. We've had 6 hour long, what do we call them? Disputes, conversations. They're just
Prolonged conflict.
oh, it's so long and stupid. And anyway, we always get to the end of it and we're like, what are we actually doing? Like, this is so dumb. But anyway, that's progress.
Yeah.
I think it's progress.
Yeah.
To be able to get there. So what happened anyway? Well, what happens anyway is that for any relationship to like really truly make it, one, we got to be surrendered, and two, we got to have connection, and that requires vulnerability, that requires showing up as your true self. It also means like before you hunker down with somebody, like, man, don't settle. Don't settle. Like, there's no law out there that says you got to get married. Like, there's nothing out there that's like a married life is a better life. It's not like that. If you don't find someone that feels like a bonus, then you're settling.
I feel like that's a very crunchy book title.
What?
A married life is a better life.
Oh, yeah. Mine's different. Mine's the opposite. So I
Can I say something about that real quick too? Like,
well, I don't know. You keep trying to take over my podcast. So, like, I guess, yeah, you're probably going to say something.
you know, I think that that whole idea of a married life is a better life. You said that the first thing is to be surrendered. I think if I would say anything to anyone listening to this, because what I hope doesn't happen is that someone listening thinks, well, I should probably get a divorce then to end up better. No. It could be that maybe your marriage is on the rocks right now, and maybe something we said could resonate, could be helpful, right? Like, that's why we share our testimonies.
So many things are fixable.
Right.
I mean, they just are, but it takes a lot of humility to fix it. And it takes two people. It does take a lot of dynamics. It's not just like that easy.
Right.
But it's also not impossible. And then there are other things
Yeah.
that aren't as easily fixable.
And that is because I've come to believe Jesus was after my soul. Jesus was after my heart. And there were some things that I was holding on to almost at an idolatrous level. Two of those things being pornography and my marriage. I wanted my marriage to work, and I wanted to keep pornography. I wanted to keep them. And Jesus, you can save me as long as I can keep these things. And perhaps me releasing those things gave me the space and capacity to receive what Jesus had been trying to offer me for so long, but I couldn't receive because I wasn't ready to. I was holding on to something so white-knuckled, raged, and tight too. And so that surrendered word that you used earlier, like, that's what I think about. I think, man, like, for me, there was I was surrendered, all right. I was surrendered to the idea that as long as I held on to these things, I was safe and that I was good. But actually, it was in releasing those things that Gio was able to.
And by
find the
releasing
freedom.
them, you don't mean like walking away from your marriage. You mean holding it with open hands, that if like it was going to be reconciled and restored, like God was going to do that. But if not, like God was going to meet you in that place, right?
Right. And
like
there was still a reward for my soul. There was still a peace and a joy and a fulfillment and a satisfaction.
whether you got the miracle of a reconciled marriage or the miracle of like a restored soul, like whatever it felt like, you know what I mean? Whatever way it was going to go, I think you do get to a place, and I got there too, of this acceptance.
Yeah.
Of like, at the end of the day, God, you can take like everything can fall away, including a marriage.
Yeah.
And I trust that you're going to satisfy my soul. You're going to heal me. You're going to be my, you know, like I trust that. Like, I'm not going to just say you're good only if you give me my marriage back. I think that's what you're saying. Like, it had to be, God, whatever you need to do and whatever you're willing to do in my life, I'm like, I can accept that, right? Like, because I believe that you'll satisfy my soul and heal my soul ultimately.
Yeah.
Marriage or no marriage.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just want to be clear. It wasn't like you saying, I'm going to let this go. I'm going to walk away from it, because your whole point was, this is not a podcast to say, hey, if you just give it a second shot, like leave this one and go out and try again, it's going to be better. Because I'll tell you, we have a whole episode on dating after divorce, and you're going to want to steer clear from that. Yeah. Not the episode, listen to it. But dating after divorce is like pretty awful, but hilarious. And it gives you great stories, but it opens up a lot of wounds. And so it's not, both paths are hard. It's hard to reconcile and stay married, especially if betrayal is involved. And it's hard to divorce.
Yeah.
Especially if children are involved. So like both roads are really hard. And at the end of the day, we're not prescribing, you know, a divorce for people. What I feel like is like, we got this second chance, and we want to steward it well and be honest about what didn't work the first time, so that we can, I mean, like, honor each other better than we did the first time.
Yeah.
So anyway, I think that might answer the question. So like, what happened anyway? Maybe not. I don't know. Maybe it gave you no information about what happened anyway, but we had a great time talking about nothing, if that's the case.
No, I think we covered a lot of good ground and gave, you know, this idea of tarrying on to the journey we were both on in our first marriage, to the journey in between, and to the journey that we're on now.
You trying to get the title, you just trying to throw it in there. I like it, babe.
You like it?
Yeah, using tarry on like it's nothing. You know what I mean? It's like part of your vernacular at this point. I like it.
Vernacular.
Yeah.
Oh, 18 points. I like that.
Thank you. Well, anyway, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening. I hope you found this episode encouraging, and I hope it does give you hope and anticipation in the middle of the mess, in the middle of the waiting, in the detour, the delay, wherever you're at. My hope is that it inspires more hope. I read this thing today that said, it's by Morgan Harper Nichols. She's one of my faves. Mm-hmm. It said, hope is a small rebellion. And I was like, maybe that's why I love hope so much. Because I kind of like, you know, being a little feisty about stuff. So if hope is like coming from a little feisty place, right? Like, yo, we have a lot of reasons to be sad. We have a lot of reasons to lose hope. We have a lot of reasons to believe that life sucks, right? We do. We all do. Like, life is hard. There's a lot of people going through a lot of really terrible things. Having hope in the midst of that is a small rebellion. To say, like, yeah, I know what my circumstances tell me I should feel. But, like, I also know that we have a God who's made a lot of promises that we can trust. And so, friends, this week, I hope this gives you what you need to tarry on. Till next time.